These are some serious questions. I didn't realize this was going to be this serious. I like this. We can just start it off right now.
Sure.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Okay, now it works. Perfect. So, Andy, tell us, how did you come to the UK?
Yeah, so anyway, thanks for having me. I'm American, as you can tell. I'm from Wisconsin. I don't know if anybody in this room knows where that is. Woo, woo. The front row, 2, 3. It's amazing. I barely know where it is. My parents still have to remind me. So I'm from the great state of Wisconsin, which is right in the middle. And I started off when I was an undergrad as an entrepreneurship major. And I guess you'd say that's where I got my start as startups. I worked for an angel group starting at about 19 and vetted a lot of deals and helped a lot of entrepreneurs before I even graduated. And then my background before coming to London is about 6 years of startup operations. The most interesting one was the world's first functional brain imaging company. So we were looking at, so it's called fMRI, and we were looking at brains before neurosurgeons, in essence, took tumors out. So I was 25 and working alongside a lot of really, really smart people, quite a bit smarter than I was, and selling to neurosurgeons. It was quite a hoot. We ended up selling that company to a big European rival, which was interesting. And then I came over here to London 6 years ago now with my wife. I got my MBA at Imperial College. I started the Venture Capital Society there and met a lot of the VCs there and started learning kind of more about structured finance and that kind of thing.
And then you can't just leave the subject of how can you start a venture capital and private equity group at Imperial College?
Yeah, so
how do you do that?
If anybody has been to Imperial College or there's any grads in the audience, you probably realize that Imperial is like 2,500 masters. It was pretty easy actually to reach out to VCs in my position as a business person, just saying, hey, I've got a lot of really smart people. You know, if you'd like to come in and pick their brains and see what kind of startups they're starting, I'd love to facilitate that. So we brought in something like 30 or 40 VCs over the first year that I was there. And very simply, you know, they just spilled their guts. They shared their advice with all these young entrepreneurs. And honestly, I think that's the best way for the investment industry to get in, is very early and kind of seed the concept with those folks, because they're the ones that are going to change the world at some point, right? So they were very happy to come in and talk to engineers.
Okay, and then what happened? You finished the MBA?
Yeah, so I got out of my MBA. That was 6 years ago. I was a fellow at Seedcamp. Probably some of you in the room know what that is. At that point, it was, you know, one of the first accelerators, I think, in outside of the U.S. And I did a lot of research on, in essence, what made accelerators tick, and that's probably why some of you are here as well. And that was, you know, 5 years ago when there weren't many, but Seedcamp had a really large data set, and they had a lot of founders. And I just asked stupid questions, like, why are you coming to an accelerator? You know, what do you kind of support do you need? Why did you choose Seedcamp over other ones, right? So that was really influential in just building my knowledge about this whole startup support ecosystem, how to do it better, what some of the organizations were failing doing, and how founders needed to be supported better. I also got to meet a lot more founders then, right? So that was pretty interesting. And after that, my role was even more interesting probably. I managed a family office's money. And I don't know how many of you know what a family office is, but I actually didn't when I came across this person who had one. He ended up hiring me to manage his investment portfolio, and I took that pretty literally, and I actually took over one of his companies as the interim CEO and ended up selling it. So, you know, I've kind of had this weird background of startup operations, helping entrepreneurs, doing some investing, and then 3.5 years ago, I got a call from the founders of Startupbootcamp. And probably some of you, at least in the room, know what that is, but our global headquarters is located here in London, and we've grown pretty quickly, and we actually have 3 of our programs. We have one of our MDs here, Raf, and we're supporting a lot of entrepreneurs every year in London.
Yes. So you started the MBA, you finished it, and then you got to know the private equity space in the UK. Then you got some experience with Seedcamp, which is the early stage funding. Mm-hmm. Then you went you had experience in family office managing money, and you sold a business, you said.
Yes.
How easy or how hard was it?
Oh, it was horrible. Yeah, it was really horrible. You know, I think it's quite easy to sell a well-functioning scaling business, but a business that's running out of money and never really found product market fit is excruciating to sell. But I guess you would say I kind of proved you can do that. And I actually got a little more money than the investors had put in out of it. And this was not something that could scale on its own or raise external capital. But if any of you entrepreneurs are in the room thinking, man, I'm not sure if this is going to go and I'm not sure if I can raise money, I actually think there are quite a few exit routes out there. Sometimes it takes somebody like me coming in from an external perspective and saying, listen, I'm the investment manager of the main investor in this company. Do you want to have a strategic partnership? Do you want to potentially acquire? But at the end of the day, investment bankers sell companies for hundreds of millions or billions. And that same concept, I think, can be applied to entrepreneurship as well. I'm surprised I haven't seen it more. You would think some of the venture funds would have somebody that specializes in actually selling companies. But at least I haven't seen that yet, right? Maybe there's an opportunity.
That's a good point. When you started to look around for buyers, what were the some options you've had which didn't work, and which one did work?
Yeah, so this was an expense management company. The whole USP at the time was to take a picture of your expenses and have somebody outsourced, an actual person, put those into your customized expense report, which is a decent idea, and it kind of it disregarded technology to a certain extent, which it was a good thing, but then our competitors picked up really good OCR and started doing it automatically for free, in essence. Mm-hmm. So that killed the company to a certain degree. But when I started this process, I took it as any sales process, and I had a big list of like 200 folks who could potentially strategically partner with this company, and I simply pinged them on LinkedIn, and I called them, and I said, hey, I've got this company. It's doing okay. It has some technology, but it's probably not going anywhere. Do you want to potentially partner or acquire it? And at the end of the day, I think 15 or 20 folks seemed relatively interested, and I think 3 or 4 went down the pipeline and said, actually, I think we will make an offer. So it was an interesting process. I wouldn't necessarily want to do it again myself, but I think, like I said, for entrepreneurs in the room, if things aren't going great with your company, I think there are other avenues other than just simply shutting your company down or fundraising. Maybe there's something in the middle there.
Okay, before we go any further, I want to say one thing. We have this interesting option here at the back, which you can see. You don't need to do anything. You just open your browser in your mobile and type in slido.com. That's it. If you want to ask any question at any time, feel free to do it. You can also vote for questions you like, so we will guaranteed answer at least top 5 questions you're going to ask. So the hashtag for tonight is SGEurope. Hashtag SGEurope. Feel free to ask away or feel free to tweet if you like to. So Andy, then you said you met some interesting folks from Startup Bootcamp.
Yeah, so Startup Bootcamp, the time I joined, I was brought on by the board to run the global organization of it. There was only, I think, 3 accelerators at the time, and it was, for lack of better words, a loose affiliation, a group of folks who all wanted to support startups. Accelerators, like I said, was kind of a nascent industry at that point. Nobody really knew all of the best practices, and to a certain extent, I got brought in to make sure things ran smoothly, to figure out what would our strategy be for growth, what would our focus be. Very early on, we made the decision to focus all of our programs at Startup Bootcamp on a certain industry, and I think we were one of the first in the world to do that. But it made sense to me to say, if we're investing in 10 companies per program and we're introducing them to between 100 and 150 mentors, that we make sure those mentors actually have a clue about their companies. So it's something really proud that I am about Startup Bootcamp. Now we've scaled to 15 programs in 11 countries. We're launching one next week. We're launching one the week after. We'll get to 20 programs around the world at some point pretty soon here. And we just make so many value-add connections through this very focused model. And that's how we sell to startups to a certain degree. Come into our 3-month program, meet everybody in your industry. And on top of that, if you've heard about Startup Bootcamp, our business model is very simply, on the other side, we have a ton of corporates per program that directly support the program and come in and mentor our startups and optimally partner with those startups that are in the program, right? So if you're coming to a Startup Bootcamp and you're a startup, you're going to have access to lots and lots of mentors, but also a lot of times those partners who you can do a partnership with, you can sell products to, you can get mentors from an executive level of those partners. So there's a lot of value that we're given.
Mm-hmm. How many of you have heard about Startup Bootcamp before today, or have had anything to do with them? Okay, how many of you have not heard about Startup Bootcamp before today, or seen what they do?
Yeah, a couple.
Still a couple. So what is it exactly, and how does it differentiate itself from other accelerators like Bootcamp, like Techstars and Seedcamp and all the other ones?
Yeah, good question. I wouldn't call us a marketing-heavy organization. You know, we have these 3 programs, for example, in London out of these 15. I'll describe Raf's program, for example. It's focused on IoT. So we have 10 Internet of Things companies from how many countries around the world? From 7 countries around the world.
Nice.
And to a certain extent, to recruit them, we don't depend on marketing. We depend on actually meeting entrepreneurs face-to-face and trying to add a lot of value before they even get in the program. So Raf and his team did something like 20 what we call fast-track events around the world. And very simply, we try to find mentors in every ecosystem we go into in startups and just have a day of mentorship, right? And we try to facilitate that without them joining the program. And the key is, if we can get to a startup and actually add value early, you know, we want to ask the question, will you join our program and we'll continue to support you, as opposed to a lot of the other programs that are supporting startups out there say, you know, come to our program and we will support you. So we want to help startups regardless if they're in our program or not. It might not be the best business model, but we think it's the best way to actually help ecosystems. So that's one of the key differentiators. I'd say another one is just simply, there aren't many folks in the world who can put this many corporate partners in the same little pot, right? We have a fintech program with, I think, 9 or 10 banks now who all are collaborating to help the same 10 startups. And those banks, their day job is, to a certain extent, to compete with each other, right? But if you get 10 heads of innovation or C-suite executives in the same room to support startups, kind of magical things happen, right? They kind of put down their normal competitive mind frames and they say, how can we help these folks? And our job out of that is simply to facilitate that conversation to happen. And we do a lot of work on the corporate side of saying, listen, this is what a startup is. Here's how you can collaborate with them, you know, and go deep and say, what's your purchasing department look like? What does your legal department? Startup to graduate from our program after 3 months and say they have multiple deals that are actually done with partners, and hopefully they have a business development pipeline of 20 or 30 going in the future, right? So we think that adds a ton of differentiated value, just because we see startups failing all the time that are especially B2B and enterprise that can't make these conversions, they can't make these sales. They don't know who to necessarily identify within a corporate and sell. They don't know what kind of partnerships are possible. It just takes a long time, right? So we try to condense that process as much as we can.
So these programs are corporate-based. So you're connecting the startups and the corporations?
Yeah, to a certain extent, that is one of our big values. Yeah, outside of, you know, it is a very mentorship focus. Mm-hmm. So we hope that our startups not only connect with a corporate in general. It doesn't help much to say, hey, we're just going to connect you with Intel or Google. We hope to actually have a mentorship relationship first, because we've found out that if a startup can have an actual mentor or a key advisor that's an executive at one of these corporates, like that opens up a ton more doors than simply acting like a sales process and saying, I want to sell this corporate from day one.
And each of them is focused on a certain vertical.
Yeah, exactly.
So which ones of, when you started, you said you had 4 programs, right?
You know what? Our first vertical was in Copenhagen, and it was a mobile program. And I can remember when we opened it, people said we were complete idiots. And they said, mobile? Oh my God, you know, you're leaving so many good startups on the table. Why don't you just take everybody? And I think it was 2 years later when everything was mobile. I don't think a startup in the world did not have a mobile presence. And all of a sudden, we need to get more and more niche. So even, you know, we started our first fintech program in London here 3 years ago. To a certain extent, fintech is a pretty wide vertical nowadays. Now we have an e-commerce vertical. We actually have an insurtech vertical. So subsectors of subsectors, right? So the funny thing that we're getting as an outcome is the more vertical specific, just the more value we can add to startups. Because if you have 10, you know, insurtech startups in the same cohort, and you have 17 insurance companies that are all backing that same program, it's pretty valuable. And everybody has a potential for making a relationship happen and making business to happen, right?
True. And of these verticals you have, which ones of them are based in London? So you have the
London ones are Internet of Things with Raf over here.
IoT, yes.
If you have a question about that, he's, you know, one of our 3 MDs in London. We have an insurance tech program and we have a finance tech program, fintech.
Mm-hmm. And elsewhere, which is the nearest demo day, for example?
You know what? Our nearest selection day, I'm going to be in Amsterdam next week, and that's for our Smart Cities program. Mm-hmm. We also have an e-commerce program in Amsterdam. You know, we have Barcelona, which is up and running. It has their demo day at 4YFN, which is alongside Mobile World Congress. That's an IoT and data program. I mean, you know, we have quite a few locations: New York, Miami, Singapore, Istanbul. So we're really spreading from kind of this close European base to really all over the world. We're looking at programs on most continents other than Antarctica, I guess you'd say.
Nice. When I think about the accelerators, one of the most successful ones, Techstars, for example, they have this different model where they just focus on one corporate per program. You do a bunch of them, which I find interesting because you basically don't just promote the one simple brand, you promote collaboration, cooperation.
Yeah.
And you told me yesterday that you also focus on helping the corporates help themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
How does it work?
Yeah, well, I think there's probably two questions in there. First of all, there are a lot of corporate accelerators in the world. You folks in the audience have probably looked at them before, and there is value in having just one corporate and getting connected very deeply, right? I think the value in that is how do you connect super deep in a corporate? What we try to do is simply distribute the risk across a lot of corporates, because we know that the likelihood of you working with just one corporate over a 3-month span, it's not 100%. It's something lower than that. But if we can introduce you to 10, 15, 20 corporates that you potentially want to partner with or sell to or get mentors from, we think that the outcome of that is a lot higher probability that you get multiple that you can work with. We do have to work with our corporate partners because a lot of times they're not used to working with startups. I think that's the difficulty. If you've sold into a big company before, it takes time for a reason. There are processes and structures set up that prevent them from moving quickly. So we go pretty deep in try to figure out how can we work with a business unit, how can we work with purchasing departments, how can we work with legals, how can we get an executive sponsor, for example. All those are questions that a typical B2B salesperson would be asking themselves, and we try to just make it really easy. And instead of them having to ask the questions, us saying, hey, within Lloyd's Banking Group or with Rabobank or whoever it might be within Cisco, we've already identified these people for you, and we actually understand what their processes look like to make sure this goes quickly for you.
So one of the biggest issues startups have is revenue, obviously. Corporates are happy to work with those startups, but it's really hard to get them sorted, get them through procurement process. What are some learnings you've had so far on this?
I think, honestly, our industry is so focused on fundraising. And it's going to sound funny coming from somebody who's invested in startups before and run these kind of organizations, but our goal isn't necessarily to raise money for our companies. It's to build amazing companies based on customer revenue. That is our goal. So if we can replace the need for a startup to raise their first 200, a lot of our industry focuses much more on investor contacts, big demo days, getting a high valuation. It's just not something necessarily we focus on. Certainly we know the investment community and have close ties, but we invite them in to try to train our mentors and train our startups and mentor them, and actually have them be aware of some of the difficulties when it comes to funding. So I think to a certain degree some of these markets are oversaturated with lots and lots of investors, and we just try to go back to the fundamentals and say, how are you going to build your business based on actually having customers who are going to pay you in the near term, right? And if we can facilitate that, we look at that as one of our core values.
So the learnings in terms of connecting startups and corporates is how do you make them set up faster in those corporations?
I don't think there's any secret sauce, right? I think you're talking about a startup that's in search mode, that doesn't have a business model, that has to iterate really quickly. And then you're talking about on the other side a big company that's found their business model and they have processes in place specifically so they don't fail. And a lot of those processes say we don't want to fail on a daily, a weekly, a monthly basis, and every quarter we need to keep increasing revenue. So I was just on Monday. I was with the innovation department of a huge corporate, and they were working through this, and they just said, we haven't really innovated for a long time, and this R&D approach to having a lot of researchers internally doesn't seem to work super well for us. So how do we go outside of our boundaries and work with startups very early? How do we not kill them, in essence, which is hard because this timing thing, startups do run out of money, and startups can have their time wasted by big companies. So on the other side, we have to train our startups and really coach them through how do you have a dialogue with big companies and how do you do a really good business development process to make sure that if you have 50 or 60 conversations in your pipeline, that just simply the ones who are interested in you don't take all of your time. Because the best feeling in the world is if you're a startup and they say, man, we really want to talk to you, come to Palo Alto for a week and then go to Tel Aviv and then go here and there, and it ends up you're 6 months into it. You spent almost all of your management team's time talking to folks, but guess what? At the end of the day, no money's going to come in. And how do you prevent that? It's really hard, right? So we try to work on almost a daily basis on this process and make sure that only warm deals come through, that we're coaching our corporates to say, listen, don't waste any startup's time. Be really upfront what your goals are, what kind of revenue you have to commit, who you have to get on board, to make this deal happen. So it's kind of a combination of sales training, business development training, but it's on both sides of the table. So it's just a little bit of a different approach that not a lot of folks take.
I like the idea of not focusing on funding, but the best investor is the customer. So help them to get customers. Yeah. What are the fundamentals of your program? Is it the same across all the other programs, IoT, FinTech, InsurTech? What are the basics? So you take some equity, right, from the startups?
Yeah, so our business model is very simply, we take a startup through this 3-month program, we take 6% equity, but then once they graduate, we still do work really, really closely with them. We found that especially the first 3 to 6 months after our program are really the key times to solidifying a lot of these relationships. We can introduce a startup to 100, 150 people over 3 months, but still that's just the initial part of a relationship. So I think the hard part starts when you start getting into, for example, a purchase order. How do you negotiate a purchase order? How do you make sure that revenue is going to come in 30 days compared to 90 days? Like those are really...
So you help with that, negotiating?
Yeah, so those are really difficult questions.
Awesome.
I'd actually like us to help more with that, and maybe we need to take a more hands-on role negotiating, but our approach right now is simply to coach startups through this process and get mentors alongside them that really believe in them as a startup, but also can be on call. If it's 9 p.m., and you're doing a deal that needs to get done by tomorrow, you need to have 5, 10 folks that you could potentially call and say, I'm struggling here. I'm not sure what to do with this contract. I'm not sure how to pass this through. I have a term sheet on the table. What do I do with this, right? So I think that is key. To go back to your first question, no, our programs aren't all the same. I don't believe in a cookie cutter approach. I think FinTech is a lot different in Singapore than it is New York. And I think when you're scaling an organization, almost the default, especially, my training in the US is a lead from center organization that doesn't allow much flexibility. And that's not what Startupbootcamp is. It has a very decentralized core, and what it allows us to do is have really, really talented people on the edges running the programs. And I'd rather have a team of 10 full-time in every program that's really working deeply on an industry with those startups than having a huge central organization, right? So even the team that I run, we're not huge, and we try to facilitate our organization. How does 10 banks in New York and 10 banks in Singapore and 10 banks in London all work together, right? That's hard. How do you facilitate that? And how do you have startups in one geography leverage corporates or mentors from another geography? Like those are all really tough questions. So that's what we're trying to really dig down and improve kind of in our ecosystem.
So what are some of the learnings of having, let's say, you're saying, how do you make 10 banks working together in one geography first?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
It is damn hard. And I think it's kind of one of those things, who says it? I know it's one of our competitors that says, do things that don't scale. Well, guess what? It's not scalable, or it's not easily scalable to get 10 big companies to work and say, we're gonna work really deeply with you, and we're gonna help you connect with startups. It's not easy, to tell you the truth. We try to be really upfront with our partners and say, listen, we're making an innovation ecosystem for you. We want you to experience innovation from all different levels. Yeah, you're right. One way to do this is to work with startups, but it's not the only way. We do a lot of trend reports. We do a lot of hackathons. We do a lot of conferences in that specific industry. So our sell to our corporate partners is not just simply plugging into a couple of startups. It's to experience innovation in a different way. And we certainly don't go in there and say, we know exactly how a big company should innovate. We actually say the opposite. We say, nobody has really figured this out. It's really hard. You've done something really, really well for 50 years, and we can try to help facilitate this conversation, but we're not going to be a big consulting firm and go in and say, this is exactly what you should do. I don't think folks should do that with startups either. Honestly, we struggle sometimes with mentors. Mentors come into a startup a lot of times, and some of you folks have probably experienced this, and they say, hey, this is what you should do. I've scaled a development team, and you should definitely do this, right? And we coach our mentors. I mean, that is, I think, just the wrong thing to do. What I think a good mentor comes in and they say, I've had a couple experiences in my life, and I've worked with outsourced dev teams, and I've worked with really strong CTOs and in-house dev teams, and here's the pros and cons. And I'm not exactly sure what's best for your business, but I'll ask you some smart questions to try to take you through this decision that you're going to have to make on your own, right? It's not necessarily an advisory role. It's almost somebody to talk through difficult decisions. That's how I view mentor. And I think the hardest thing is, get folks from a corporate mind frame that were specifically hired to execute, right? People have hired them specifically to say, you're right all the time, and how do you not fail? Get them into a startup environment, and they're going to start pointing and say, you should do this. So we try to take a lot of time up front in training our mentors and our advisors and our corporate partners and saying, listen, you're going to need to approach startups in a different way, in a way that's a little bit more coaching, a little bit more talking through these problems, and communicating your case studies as opposed to opinions.
So you're mentioning mentors, and you're known for having good mentors, which are very specific and big experts in the industry.
Yeah.
How do you find them? There's a question here on Slido from an experienced CTO looking for a new challenge and without a network. Where would you approach these kind of mentors? These are kind of startups, but let's talk about mentors and how do you find them?
Yeah, so first of all, we try to, like I said, get really, really good operating teams that are running these programs. And those folks very simply have spent a lot of years in a certain industry, and they know a lot of executive level folks who could potentially become our mentors, right? So I think that's the first key. The second key is we have a lot of these corporate partners where there are executives that just don't know how to get into startups. I mean, this question that you got, it's pretty normal to be a CTO of a large company and just not know where to start as a mentor. So first of all, I'd say just reach out to me, reach out to our programs. Because we have such specific programs, we do resonate deeply if you're from that industry. If you've been a CTO of a fintech company for the last 20 years, man, you certainly have seen some shit. And we'd like you to help us. We'd like you to help our startups to really unlock their value as well. So to a certain extent, some of it's doing things like this, meeting smart people, being approached. But I would say, this is a network business. And startups are a network business as well, and we try to share our network as much as we can.
True. So you have this group of networks, this group of mentors, and you're helping those startups. When you're helping them negotiate, what are some big mistakes you see startups doing when talking to big corporates?
Yeah, so when it comes to specifically corporates, I think I've made every wrong move in the book. And at least my previous and probably still sales tactic is just to make friends. And I don't know if any of you guys and girls go into sales meetings and just think when you're walking out, man, that person really likes me. That's a good thing. And a lot of times that just wastes your time. So I think first and foremost, folks who haven't done hardcore enterprise sales and B2B sales, they don't particularly know the right questions to ask. For example, just saying, do you have committed budget to purchase some kind of solution in this area? Have you talked to other potential options first? Like asking those kind of questions is really important, and it's something that I learned the hard way. I failed with a lot of my sales meetings, right? So we try to have mentors and advisors that are really close to our startups that take them through that. Optimally, I'd like you to be making sales calls with a mentor next to you and them to help give feedback after that 5-minute sales call. What went well, what didn't, what was the next step? Planning what your follow-up communications will be. That's like the nuts and bolts of business. That's actually how you make money. And it's no bullshit. Like, it's hard.
It's very valuable. So you recommend not wasting time with the wrong kind of person from the company, but finding out if the person actually has a responsibility to decide, right?
I'm certainly not an expert in this. What I recommend is if you're doing something and you're in a startup, find people that are way, way smarter than you at doing whatever that is and surround yourself with them. And if you're doing a sales call and haven't sold enterprise software or hardware or whatever, find somebody who has spent their entire career doing that and beg them to sit next to you for a couple of hours when you're making calls, and then get feedback on how they think you're doing. And then find another person and have them give you feedback, right? Because we try to make it so that it's not just one data point, it's many. But I don't feel like I'm in the position, I'm not a great enterprise salesperson, right? We have a lot of partners, but to a certain extent, I've used the friend approach. Hey, be friends with me. Startupbootcamp is great. It takes a long time. It certainly wasn't the optimal way to do it. So in these conversations, when I get asked by a startup, hey, how do you do this? I normally say, I don't know, but I'm going to try to find somebody who's really, really good in your industry at doing something that you're struggling with. And let's make a connection here and see if this is beautiful, right?
So the program is taking 3 months. You have mentors helping the startups.
Yeah.
What do you normally expect from a startup who graduates after those 3 months?
So my desired outcome personally would be that a startup has a handful of key advisors that will stick with them for years to come. I think that's the most important thing for a startup to have. What I've seen in the startups that really succeed, they just have people that believe in them. They don't have 100 people that are vague advisors. They have 5 or 10 people who just love them, you know? And I think from that core group of folks, a lot is possible. Whether it's selling enterprise, software, to raising capital, to hiring really good people, I think it's just key to have those close advisors close to your company. And we try to make that happen. And we try from day one when a company comes into our program, even when they go to selection days. So if you're a top 20 company, we invite you in for 3 days. We give you some advice on how to deal with mentors. And then for 2 days, we're going to introduce you to 50 people. So the funny thing is, a lot of startups that have come to selection days haven't gotten in Startup Bootcamp, but still have been able to raise money off that experience, have been able to secure mentors. I mean, it's a really valuable thing, right? But our job is then, over the coming 3 or 4 months, to facilitate those conversations to happen, right? You're going to meet 50 people on day one, even before the program. You're going to meet 100 more in the first couple weeks of the program. And then we're going to try to make those really smart connections and get feedback. So from those 150 people, we're going to say, which of these companies are you starting to resonate with? Which ones would you potentially become a key advisor with? And then we make those connections, right? A lot of those conversations, they're just not possible to do as a startup. It's hard to follow up with a mentor and get serious feedback of, hey, will you mentor me? That's a difficult conversation, and you normally don't get a straight feedback. But with us kind of as in the middle as a facilitator, we try our best at least to make sure that by the time you graduate from the Startup Bootcamp program, you have people that truly, truly believe in you, and hopefully you're well on the way to selling and getting some revenue in the door, and optimally you've already had the revenue that you need to sustain yourself, so you're not forced in the next couple of months to raise this big round.
True.
Because a lot of these organizations that support startups, that is what they focus on. They, in essence, spend all 3 or 6 or 9 months or whatever polishing you up. And you have a great 2-minute pitch and you're great in front of somebody for 5 minutes, but you haven't been investing that time necessary to build your business. And we just try to take a little bit of a different approach.
Yeah. How many of you have a mentor? Raise your hand. How many of you don't? Okay,
more than half, right?
More than half, yes. How would you recommend finding a mentor?
Finding a mentor is a beautiful experience, I think. And I think some of it is just simply the experience of looking for one. And I have about a 3-hour workshop. I should do it to the public at some point. It's actually, I think, called Andy's Guide to Mentorship Prep. And the first thing, one of the key takeaways is, let's say, is you've got to know what to look for. And the hard thing with finding a mentor is you've kind of only got one shot with somebody. You have 5 or 10 minutes, let's say, networking here, and you have to be able to identify very quickly, you're the kind of person who I could fall in love with. This could be an actual relationship that lasts many years, and you have to identify it, and then you have to go on a limb and say, man, I really would love to spend more time with you. Can I please buy you lunch, dinner, coffee, whatever it's going to take in the next month? Because I'd love to have another hour of your time. What can I do to make that happen? It doesn't have the impact if you follow up with somebody on LinkedIn 4 days later, right? It has an impact if you do it that second, that day. You have in the back of your mind, what do you want out of a mentor? And then actually, key that in and leverage it and make an approach that second that you identify that, right? So anyway, make a long story short, if you're looking for a mentor, actually identify what you want in that person, whether it's a humble person or an honest person or the best salesperson in the world or whatever. Have that in the back of your mind. And then when you talk to that person, don't be afraid to just point at them and say, man, you are something special. I'd love to spend some time with you. Can I buy you coffee, or how can I get some of your time the next month, right? It's a difficult experience the first time you do it, but I've at least done it a lot in my life, and I feel comfortable doing it right off the bat. And guess what? Some people say, yeah, you're a little weird. You're an American, and I'm not sure if I'm into this, so let's not do this. But at least I get it out of the way, right? And more often than not, people respond really, really well to, if especially you're an entrepreneur, in asking for their time. People like that feeling. So I'd encourage all of you who raise your hand, which is more than half the room, identify that in the back of your mind, and maybe you can even find somebody tonight and just say, listen, let's try to form a relationship out of this, right?
Or you can join a startup bootcamp. So you make it easy
I should be selling more, shit.
So you make it easy for your startups. You get them together with the mentors. When they come and join the program, what are the key problem areas which you help them with?
Gosh, it almost feels like by definition, a startup is a struggling organization, right?
It is, yeah.
They're almost, the second they're formed, they're running out of money. The second they're formed, they need to convince folks to take, if any paying job, maybe a free job. So that's hiring. Hiring's hard. Maybe you and your co-founder have found each other and you're lucky enough, but then you have to go and find, a great enterprise salesperson, a couple of developers, and say, hey, you've been getting paid 50, 100, 200K a year. I'd love to convince you to join my startup for free, but I'm going to give you some equity, and that's going to be worth something in the long run, right? That's a hard conversation. So we try to at least coach startups through that process of how to do that optimally, what kind of folks to bring into your company. Fundraising is a key aspect of startups. You're not just going to break even from day one. So how to go about communicating with an investor, and how is communicating with an investor different than doing, let's say, enterprise sales? There are differences, right? Investors look for different kind of things.
Yeah.
There's just so much, right? So we try to take a pretty methodological approach and just say, okay, if you're 10 startups in a certain industry, for example, Raf's IoT program, that's hardware. So we have to have a couple of experts come in and say, well, all of you are probably at some point going to manufacture in China. How do you do that? Mm-hmm. And what are the optimal ways to do that? And how can we connect you with folks on the ground to really get your MVP up and running quickly, right? So that's kind of why we believe in a little bit more tailored approach to our program, and none of them are exactly different, right? This is a people business, mm-hmm. and we try to bring in experts that are specialists in those specific industries.
So you help them with revenues, with funding, with hiring people?
With life coaching.
Life coaching.
I mean, honestly, I don't know how many of you are a founder of a startup, but founders break up. Has anybody experienced that in the room?
Yeah, that's true, yeah. So
there we go. So thanks for being honest. Probably everybody else is like, I don't want to. He's sitting next to me, I'm not sure. So we actually do not only personality testing, but in all of our programs, we bring in outside folks to do conflict resolution from day one. I'd prefer to know the potentials for conflict in a founding team before they get in the program, and if we can't identify them, simply asking the question, hey, you guys are two great founders, you've known each other for a lot of years, but if you were to ever break up, what reason would it be for? And then you just pause and let them look at each other.
And what are the suspicious answers?
Whether it be a different outlook of life, right? Some people want to build a huge business, and some people want to build a lifestyle business. Uh-huh. And guess what? Founders don't always talk about that. And when you ask them, well, will you sell for 20 million? And somebody says no, and the other person says yes. Guess what? You need to be a little bit more on the same page than not understanding some of those basics about your relationship, right? Mm-hmm. So some of this is kind of like dating coaching or marriage counseling or whatever it may be. At the end of the day, a startup is only as good as its founder's relationship. And we try to make sure that our founders are on a good footing, and they have a really open place where they can share with each other, and they have good quality experts and advisors and mentors alongside them, so that when the shit hit the fan, because it will, that there are people around them to pick them up, right?
So how do you find, how do you help your startups which are too early, so product market fit? Do you have any issues with that, or they are mostly ready for selling to corporates? Yeah,
good question. We try to bring them in at kind of this Goldilocks period, not too early, not too late. Certainly our companies always have more than just an idea, and they have to have some kind of quantifiable proof that people are going to find their product valuable. In hardware, it's tough, right? Because you're probably not manufacturing your hardware.
True, yeah.
So what kind of things has a company done to diminish their risk, whether it's a crowdfunding platform, or whether it's pre-sales, or whether it's having an MVP that you actually have user feedback on? Whatever it is, the questions that we ask when we're selecting startups are just that. How do you think that you can prove that customers are actually going to pay for your product in the near term? And how can we make those connections that actually pay off and are valuable to you?
There's a good question here on Slido from Tim. What is Startup Bootcamp's biggest challenge, and what do you need to improve?
That's a hard one. Is that number one?
It's a very hard one, yes. Yeah. It is number one, yeah.
Who's Tim? I think our biggest challenge is, as we do different locations, it's just hard to find really, really world-class, excellent people that on one side really know an industry well, but on the other side can really take the right approach with startups. Because we've found, like I said before, that a lot of the smartest people in the world are kind of like dictators after all. They point and they share their opinions openly, and they say, you should do this. And I've sold 5 companies, right? And we try to look for the really smart people that say, from day one, I don't know the answer, but I'm going to really find somebody who can help you deeply, right?
Yeah.
It's not easy to find those kind of people, right? And it's not easy to have those people that say they're going to commit normally about 4 years of their life to running a Startup Bootcamp program, and it's a long-term commitment. So when we're expanding, it's not the easiest thing. I mean, hiring is always the hardest, and to get people like Raf, who's in the room, and our other MDs, that's a struggle for us. And we're actively trying to get better at that, and of course developing our network. But if we're going somewhere like, for example, South America, where we haven't launched a program yet, you need to spend months and months, if not years, with somebody to realize if they're that kind of person, right? So it's a long-term relationship for us as well. So that's a difficulty. What else are we struggling with? I'd say, to a certain extent, to be very open, we weren't the first in this game. I think we're doing something really different, but our American competitors like Y Combinator and 500 Startups are great marketing engines. They might not have necessarily the fully built-out programs or industry focuses we do, but they're great at self-promotion. And at Startup Bootcamp, we're kind of like those folks that just get shit done. We think we add a ton of value to our startups, but we probably need to get a little bit better at promoting ourselves, at branding. We're going through a rebranding exercise right now, and we're asking hard questions, like if you want to put one statement on the front of our website, what would that be? It's certainly not come to Startup Bootcamp, have a party, and raise millions of pounds, right? It's something closer to come to Startup Bootcamp and actually grow your business through revenues, right? But we haven't yet put our finger on, maybe we don't need a tagline, but I think the more of these kind of things that we can do and share really what we're about and have people believe in our kind of way of doing business, I think the better.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to corporates working with these startups, do you have any volunteers from those companies helping the startups because they want to? Or they just have to do it because they employ...
You wouldn't believe it, but we have to say no a lot.
Nice.
I think the difficulty is, like with this mentor thing, just to ask. I probably could ask anybody in the room, hey, would you be a mentor of startups? Hey, could you come and help somebody who's young and really could use your expertise? Like almost everybody says yes, but there aren't too many opportunities of people to ask you that. Has anybody actually been asked that in the room? It doesn't happen often, right?
No.
So when us as Startup Bootcamp comes into a big company with 100,000 folks and says, we're looking for really industry experts that can help 10 amazing startups, you have thousands and thousands of people who are interested in that, right? Our biggest struggle, I think, is sorting through those folks and seeing actually who can have really an open mind, not dictate, have really specific value to help people, because we also don't want to waste time. We don't want to introduce our startups to thousands and thousands of people. You just don't have time to meet that many people, right? So there is a curation process on both sides for sure.
There's a good question here again from Anonymous. What kind of materials should you invest in to explain your product idea? Probably documents. What kind of documents would you recommend?
Materials to explaining your product idea. It feels like the first thing that I'd spend a lot of time and money investing in is your front page of your website. The first thing somebody sees is going to represent your company.
That's a good point, yeah.
And there's a trickle-down effect, and we're thinking really, really deeply about that right now with Startup Bootcamp. That has to do with branding in terms of communication, in terms of visuals, in terms of who you're targeting, your target audience. Once you've figured out that and probably have a back-end brand guidelines to say, okay, here is our target customer. For us, we're trying to define that, right? It's more mature entrepreneurs who typically are running B2B companies. It seems like that's kind of our target market right now. And everything kind of trickles down from that. So we have, whether it is sales presentations or internal collateral, that all takes from that. I hope that answers the question. Somebody's raising their hand. Maybe that was your question.
We'll have one at the end. Okay. Just keep it. We'll come back to it. So that's the answer which you recommend. How hands-on are you getting with startups? Because you said to me that you're running the Glow program.
Me
right?
personally?
Yeah.
Is that a question up here too?
No, that's my question.
Okay. I guess this is kind of like open Andy hour. I'm not super hands-on with startups anymore. It's probably one of the difficult parts of my role is, to a certain extent, I run a startup called Startup Bootcamp. And I really try to take as much time as I can, but I'm going to be honest, I haven't met all of our startups. We have 15 programs. I find it even difficult to get to every program. How I try to use my time optimally is I have a couple of presentations, one of them specifically, how do you form a mentor relationship? And I try to go into as many programs as I can and spread that knowledge. But at the maximum, I spend an hour or two per startup. And then a lot of it is kind of a one-off. You know, I don't identify with everybody either right off the bat, but there are a lot of startups in our ecosystem that, you know, they point to me and I point to them and they say, you know, let's really keep in touch. And not only let's keep in touch, they email me every month for the next year. And funny enough, I do a lot of talks and I've probably met thousands of startups every year. And there are only 3 or 4 startups I've ever met that have emailed me on a monthly basis for over a year. And I think 2 of them have sold. So It just kind of tells you something like, you know, investing in this kind of relationship is a long-term relationship. Mark Suster has a awesome blog post, I think it's called Lines Not Dots. And you know, the point is, it takes knowing somebody and connecting with them 4, 5, 6 times over the span of a year to form a relationship, right?
Sure.
And I think most startups and most people in life just don't put that kind of time into investing in forming a relationship, right? So it takes time.
So you're mentioning that you've heard many startups talk to you and pitch to you. When it comes to pitching somebody like you, an investor or somebody important, an influencer, what are the key mistakes you see startups doing? And what are your tips on how to improve your pitch?
I have exclusively one, which is the key mistake that a lot of startups make is they don't tell the story. They don't start literally from day one. Why do you have this idea and why are you doing something really, really valuable? Why do you care about solving this problem? Why are you in this with your founder? Just the whys, right? A lot of founders, they sit down and they say, I'm creating the best artificial intelligence chatbot for fintech. And let me tell you about that. And I say, hold on. Like, who are you? Like, why are you credible? Why are you doing this? If it doesn't work, are you going to give up? Who's your co-founder? How long have you spent in this industry? Like, all those questions come to mind. It's all credibility building, right? Yeah. So if I can give one advice, you know, if you're starting literally every conversation that you start as a startup, I think you should start with your story, but not where you think. I think from day one, where are you from? You know, I say, I'm from Wisconsin. This is my background. I came to London. Now I'm doing Startupbootcamp. You wouldn't have found me credible if I would have said, well, let me tell you about Startupbootcamp from day one, right? But that's what a lot of founders make that mistake, is not going deep, not going for where you're from. Just remember, you're trying to make a personal relationship. And the only way to do that is to sell somebody on you personally, and then get into, oh yeah, by the way, you know, I've spent a career in Internet of Things and hardware, and I love it. And I just stumbled upon this problem about 9 months ago, and my co-founder and I, man, we are going to solve it. We are going to be a big company, and we're going to help a lot of people. Like, that's very powerful, but it loses credibility if you start from day one, hey, here's our product, here's what we're doing, right?
It's a great point. Big story really helps to help people to remember your story, as well as make a good PR. There's a question about PR here from Octavian and Will. What is the added value of PR growing startups, and at what stage is it appropriate? Yeah,
so there's a couple of lines of thoughts when it comes to PR. One of them is the Valley approach to build your product and never promote yourself. And another one is, you know, let's say just another approach, which is you got to sell from day one, everything. And I think I'm somewhere in between. I've seen companies fail because they only build product, and I've seen companies fail because they only promote themselves. And what I will say, and I've discovered this recently, is there are just some people in the world that can just sell their ass off. You know, you give them an objective to gain credibility and exposure for your company, and they'll do it. But before you get that kind of person, you need a product that functions and people actually like. So I think, you know, once you have early credibility that customers will pay for your product, it's probably time to get an expert in your company that can own the exposure avenue and can really coach your whole team, even the founders, through how do you develop that relation with the press, I guess you'd say. You know, more granular advice would be, don't target TechCrunch. I mean, I know Mike Butcher would love that, but go to your industry exposure. Go to actually understand who your customers are and figure out what they're reading and target those kind of folks, because I think that's the most valuable kind of PR very early in a startup's life, is a very targeted exposure that'll get you money in the door. Not the TechCrunch articles, even Wired and things like that. That's a very specific audience, and it's unlikely to be your target audience, right? So define who your target audience is, and then put some time, once you have product market fit, into doing a little bit of PR and having somebody on your team that's really good at that. That's my advice.
So you're saying you have a tiny team of people who are in your programs. Do you also help your startups with expertise, like how to do a campaign, how to reach out to new customers, how to select the right conferences to go to?
Yeah.
Or you leave it up to the experts from your mentorship program?
We try to. as much as possible. And certainly we have some expertise, and accelerators do have expertise internally, but we're never going to be as good as somebody who's spent 20 or 30 years in an industry. And if it was me personally, I'd much rather, if I was a startup, as opposed to having a junior PR person in a program helping me, I'd rather have somebody who's had their PR agency for 30 years and really loves working with startups. That's my preference. And we invest much more time into identifying those kind of folks who can help our startup as opposed to hiring folks that can help startups, right? We're more so the connector.
Okay, so you're mentioning you started that with 4 programs, now we have 15. You're saying that the plan is go to 20 soon. What is the big vision of Startup Bootcamp?
The big vision is to help founders in this different way that I've been explaining. Help them through growing their actual company, through revenues, through mentorship, through key advisors. If they need money, yes, getting them money, but probably defocusing that. The big vision is to keep helping entrepreneurs in that way. Honestly, there's verticals that we haven't gone into, whether it's augmented reality or artificial intelligence or tourism. There's just so many. And I could imagine 3, 4, 5 Startup Bootcamp programs around the world for each of those. So I think our grand vision is, how do you gather a lot of smart people in a certain industry from around the world in a certain location, but then go to other locations. We have, like I said, New York, London, and Singapore, all fintech programs. And that becomes really valuable when you're scaling your fintech startup to other locations to have almost a default connection network in different countries, right? So we're trying to take a very focused approach on industry, but also go global with that, right? So I don't think there's necessarily a cap on that. There's a lot of accelerators in the world, but we think we're different enough and add a lot of distinct value that we could pretty much keep expanding if we do it in the right way indefinitely.
Do you plan any changes to the program, the way it's run and the way it's operated, or this is set and it's working and you want to keep doing it?
I think it would be un-startup-like of me to say anything is set necessarily. So we look at Startup Bootcamp as 15 programs that are constantly iterating. As you probably look at your startups as getting a lot of market data and taking it back and distilling it and figuring out the right direction. I like the 3-month idea because people can't concentrate for a year or 2 years. We really want to have a focused time that you can spend all your effort on one thing. Bring your founding team together, leverage other folks who are around you. So I think that's a good time frame. If we were to make it, let's say 6 months, it's tough to do something so hard and so intense for a longer format, right? Also, to tell you the truth, visas in Europe are hard. If you're an American here, you can come on a 3-month visa, but staying for longer than that, it's not always possible necessarily. So some of it is just logistical. We want to attract startups from around the world to a certain location with a certain focus, but also on top of that, we think that is a good time frame to really connect with a class and spend all your time and energy on one thing, right?
Okay, now my last question before we go to the audience is, you have lots of alumni, 350 startups. What do you do for them after they leave? Or you just forget about them, or do you have any special programs, how you help them?
Yeah, we have an alumni growth program for sure, and we have staff that are doing all sorts of things. Our focus is not to waste a startup's time. So we don't do too many larger, unfocused events every year. We have a couple. We have a big alumni summit every year, which last year was in London. We had 25 kind of heads of corporate innovation, 25 VCs, and about 50 of our founders. And over 2 days, we just simply facilitated conversations. And guess what? The VCs and the corporate folks, they got a lot of value out of that as well. So we're trying not to just simply hold event for the sakes of getting our startups in front of important people. We actually try to have them communicate really deeply. But we do take a hands-on approach. So we've found that the best approach is for our alumni, just simply being there, answering questions, talking through some of these deeper struggles, right? Connecting them with our network if they need it, but we don't run, that many of these huge, large-scale, let's say, conferences every year.
It's cool. Now let's take some questions from the audience. We're gonna have a handheld microphone, which will be walking you through. Diego, can we use this microphone? And the first question was right there. Yeah. So, Diego, stay there. So what's your question?
Hi, I have a question not related generally to Startup Green, but generally to all the accelerator and incubators. So as you know, for example, in London there are quite a few.
Yeah, I think 50 or 60 last time I heard a report.
Exactly. So putting the perspective of the founders that need to just simply decide in which one to apply.
Yeah.
Apart from choosing the accelerator based on just the money or how much equity you have to give, something like that, which other feature and characteristics a founder should look in an accelerator or incubator? I think it's clear, the question, right?
Yeah, it's clear. You know,
Thanks.
so there are, for a young startup looking to enter this kind of support, let's say organization, it is difficult to choose, right? And the hardest thing I think is you go to a lot of these websites and they're exactly the same. And they have the same value and they list some big name person and I think, oh shit, you know, Bill Clinton is a mentor here. I think the number one thing I would do if I was a founder and I was evaluating where should I go is I would very simply develop a relationship with the leadership team of that accelerator. That's what I would do.
It takes time.
It takes time, right?
It takes time.
You know, the hard thing is there are no easy ways out of developing a relationship. So I think it's the same way, like my wife just got a new job, and my advice to her was, don't just take any old job, actually know the people who you're working with. You know, if you get an offer, go and say, I want to have coffee with 2 or 3 colleagues. I think that's the appropriate thing to do. And in my mind, if I'm running the best startup in the world, I'm going to do a lot of diligence on any organization that I'm thinking about giving up equity to. Mm-hmm. So if you're not willing to at least commit the time to make a longer term relationship with a few folks to identify if they're value add, I question if this is right for you, right? So I'd say it's a good use of your time to at least reach out and have a conversation with those folks that are running it.
Yes, okay. Another question? Right here?
Hi, I'm Carla. I'm also from Wisconsin, so that's pretty awesome.
You're from
Go
Wisconsin?
Packers. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, my
That's
question
never
actually,
happened.
I know, it's weird. This is great.
the
So
same
my
accent,
question's
that's
actually up on the board, and I was just wondering, I've had a lot of ideas, and I'm really excited about one in particular, but I'm afraid I don't know exactly where to start. So my question is, what's the best way to shop around an idea to get that initial feedback and maybe look for
question.
co-founders without it being stolen, which is what I'm really, really nervous about.
Yeah. You know what? I'm going to be honest, and this might be horrible advice, but I've never seen an idea stolen in my life. And I've talked to a lot of smart people, but I think at the end of the day, you know, like folks who are doing a company have a long-term cause and something they want to solve. And you could probably tell everybody in this room what your idea is, and nobody's going to care about it as much as you. And probably nobody's going to have like the desire or avenues to execute that company. So if it was me and I had the world-class idea and I was looking for a co-founder, I would talk to as many people as I possibly could at an event like this and just see what their reaction is, right? And hopefully you can find somebody that cares equally as deeply about solving that problem. And that's how like a beautiful co-founder relationship starts. But there's some online platforms that have looked into this. Honestly, the only way that I've seen it happen is every night try to force yourself into an event like this and just talk to tons of people. And there are also some pitch events out there for ideas. So if you can get in front of a lot of people all at once, it'll probably save you a little bit of time. But there's just no easy way around sharing your idea, you know, being really emphatic about it, trying to figure out what kind of co-founder you're looking for, have that in your mind, so that when you identify them, you should say, listen, this is great, let's grab coffee, or can I take you out to lunch, or whatever it may be. So have something in your mind, talk to a lot of people, and it normally takes probably 3 to 6 months, I'd say, of really hard work. And then when you find it, though, it'll really mean something, right? Hopefully that answers your question.
I agree. You know, the chance that somebody is going to quit the job and start building your idea is a very small one. This happens only at the biggest stage. Like Rocket Internet is famous for stealing people's, not ideas, but companies. So basically, they do Groupon in Brazil, for example. But it's already a proven business. It's not stealing an idea. I wouldn't worry about it. The upside is the feedback you get is really going to help you make the idea better. So next question is right at the back.
Hi, sorry. My name's Octavian. You saw my question earlier.
Okay.
Hey there.
Key thing I wanted to ask is this. You've been speaking about getting startups to go to these events and to meet as many people as possible. What actually is the value of going to maybe some of the larger, more formal conferences and getting the guys to exhibit versus to do demos? Is there something which you think is more appropriate than not?
That's a killer question,
Very good question.
and I get that asked a lot. let's assume that a startup is giving you, a conference is giving you free space, right off the bat, because I know some of them are 5, 10, 15 grand. If a conference is giving you free space, then all your investment is time. And if I was going into a conference, I would have really, really, really specific outcomes that you want to achieve. If it's fundraising, I would look on the guest list and I'd reach out to every single potential fundraiser, or funder, sorry, and try to set up meetings prior to the conference. If it's doing deals, I would identify everybody in your industry that could potentially buy. I think it is a complete waste of time to simply stand by your booth. But you can still get a lot of value out of your conferences. I've been to a lot of big ones, and I just you should probably put, I would guess, a month or 2 of effort before the conference just in getting meetings for that conference, right? Then it could be really valuable. But I think there are a lot of folks who simply, the Web Summit offers them a free booth space, they go, they party for 3 days, they come back, they say, oh shit, I just wasted a week, and I didn't really get anything out of it, right? That's a real problem. I think the word is conference whore, right? I don't know if you can say that here, but I think there are these folks, so just don't get sucked into that. You know, if you're treating it like true sales and business development, like you're on the right path right away.
Yes, I agree. And you know, some conferences which are good, they are helping you. They're going to help you to find the right people to meet. But like Andy says, you should make the efforts to find out who you want to meet there and make sure you meet them before you go back, because then you come back and say, hey, maybe you wasted the time. One more question tonight. Where is the next question? Okay, we have right here.
Front row and last row. Maybe we can get a middle one.
I suppose the question is there, though it is my question too. And we all, as humans, care a lot about all sorts of different things. And specifically, what would you advise a startup that cares beyond its monetary success to sort of look for in accelerator? And there are specific accelerators that focus on social impact, environment, and so forth. Where would you point a startup that is either non-for-profit or profit-making, but with a social impact?
Is the question, what outside of mentors is a good outcome from an accelerator? Did I interpret that right? So you're saying you have a social impact company,
Yeah.
and I don't know any social impact accelerators necessarily, but I think some accelerators do look, you know, they take social impact companies into them. Yeah, it's a tough question. You know, I mean, there's a whole industry, I think, built up around social impact. So the question I would personally ask if I was thinking about an accelerator, you know, that could help me is, what kind of connections do you have in this space that can directly help my company? So probably you have some difficulties right now. One of them might be fundraising, because some specific social impact funds would fund your company. You know, if an accelerator doesn't have those connections, they're probably not right for you. So I think just ask the question, you know, figure out what you need in your company, and then to ask the questions. Can you help me with that and prove that you have these connections? So, is that helpful?
Yes. Before you finish, so I want to ask
We have all these questions
one
up
last
here.
questions.
Yeah.
We've asked many of them
Have we? Okay,
actually.
cool.
My question is, how do you know when your job is done? When is Startupbootcamp has done its deed and helped enough entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
what do you still need to achieve to make sure you're going to be happy with the results?
You know, I think at the end of the day, if you're giving equity to anybody in your company, that should be a long-term relationship. They should be considered a partner in your company. And for us, we take 6% equity, so we are partners.
Yeah.
And I don't think that relationship should end until, you know, even when the company sells or goes bust or whatever, we hope that we carry those friendships in the future and can work together at some point, right? Coming out of the program I already described, you know, we're looking for a startup to have a lot of key advisors, hopefully some inroads to potential revenue, hopefully some good connections with funders if they need them. But our job is kind of never done, you know. I mean, I hope that us as Startupbootcamp as a partner of a company, we would be on speed dial or speed email or whatever when the shit hits the fan, when stuff happens, when somebody needs a connection, when something goes wrong. Like, that is the organization I aspire to grow at least. And I think that most of our founders, if you ask them, would say, you know, Startupbootcamp does play that role, even though somebody might raise $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, $20 million. One of our companies just raised $23 million, and I know they're immensely close to our Amsterdam program. They still, on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, interact, right? So I'm hoping that, you know, if you do become a Startupbootcamp company, that you definitely don't just look at it as a 3-month relationship. Like, we are making long-term relationships here,
Yeah.
and we're investing in the future of that too.
There was this event here 2 days ago with the head of Google and the head of CEO of Google and the CEO of DeepMind. And they both asked about the biggest challenge they have. And the biggest challenge the Google CEO said they have is knowing how to innovate. It's really hard, even for a company like Google, the second biggest company in the world. What you do is you help corporates innovate, which is awesome.
Yeah,
So I hope you're going to be doing it for a very long time.
I hope so too.
I would like to thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Please join me in thanking Andy Shannon from Startupbootcamp.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Now,